Hello, everybody. I'm sure some people are going to be trickling in as we get started, but yeah, so this morning we're going to be talking about recovery capital and how we can incorporate that into recovery housing. Our presenter today is John Lehman. So John is a person in long-term recovery. John facilitates research in collaboration with Dr. David Bess and other scientists to empower frontline providers in the delivery of support services that measurably enhance client outcomes. So Mr. Lehman is considered a subject matter expert on this. He's provided testimony to members of US Congress, House of Representatives, state and municipal governments. He resides in Boynton Beach, Florida with his wife, Donna, and he's dad to 4 adult children and pop to 8, soon to be 9 remarkable grandchildren. So we're really excited to have John present on this topic. And before I hand it over to John, I just wanted to let you guys know, just so John can have the opportunity to cover what he wants to cover. We're going to be holding questions until the end, but we're going to leave room enough to hopefully get them all answered and for you guys to unmute yourself and ask any questions, as well as we'll be monitoring the chat to cover the questions at the end as well. So if everyone can just keep themselves on mute so that we can hear John, that would be great. And John, I'll pass it over to you.
Excellent. So I've got to switch screens here. I think this is going to work now. Nope, that didn't work. Okay. Sorry, 1 second. So I believe you're seeing my presenter screen, and I want you to be seeing the actual slides.
So John, down at the bottom, you'll want to click on your share screen button, because we're still seeing the regular view of everyone.
Right. Hold on 1 second while I get there. So I want this to be over here. I want this to be put this over here. And then press that, and that should put it over here. No. Okay. So I guess I'm going to have to do it this way because we don't want to take people's time up. So,
scheduled me now.
So when I, okay. Sorry, this is very confusing. Let's move this over here. And then let's see what happens when I hit screen share. So are you all seeing the PowerPoint presentation that starts with?
Yep. It looks great, John.
Okay. And when I click on this, are you seeing the presenter notes or are you seeing the slideshow?
We see the slideshow, I believe.
All right.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
Okay, we're good. All right. So sorry for that delay, and it's wonderful to be here with all of you. And I'll do my best to admit people because I see that I'm having taken over as host. The admit button is popping up. I don't know if there's a way for you to manage that, Bree, but that would be ideal.
Yes.
Okay, so to get started, the purpose of today is to talk about recovery capital and provide some background on the science and theory. That'll be a brief intro, about 15 minutes. And then into the process of measuring recovery capital and why it is that we engage in that process and how that process benefits the process of recovery planning. And then where do we do that? And for this channel, we're talking about delivery in certified recovery housing, which is an ideal setting. We'll talk about why that is during this presentation. And then last, we're going to talk about why recovery support services in general benefit all the stakeholders. And by that, I'm referring to the clients themselves, to their family members, to the addiction treatment centers that work with them, to the departments of correction and drug court programs that work with this population. Everyone that's involved in trying to help individuals achieve resilient recovery benefit when recovery support services are added to the mix or the toolkit to address the addiction crisis that we're facing in the country. So that takes us to what our mission is. And our mission is to shorten addiction careers. We're all in the business of trying to help individuals to shorten their addiction career and expand their recovery career. And if you think about it in that term, the average addiction career is 28 years. And so, and it generally takes somewhere between 4 and 5 episodes of treatment in order for individuals to achieve resilient recovery. And resilient recovery is another descriptor for stable recovery, which is absent recovery based or absence-based recovery for a sustained for a 5-year period. So we know from the science that 86% of those that achieve 5 years of sustained absence-based recovery will go on to live sober for the remainder of their lives. And that is consistent with other chronic conditions, such as diabetes, hypertension, et cetera. But we also know from our experience that it is a very long process to get to 5 years of sustained recovery. And in fact, can take on average 28 years. So what are we in the business of doing? Shortening addiction careers, extending recovery careers. And then how do we go about doing that is what we're going to talk about today, or at least one tool in the toolkit. So let's move on to some facts and some models. So 58% of all the individuals that identify as having a substance use disorder that merits specialty treatment based on SAMHSA and ASAM criteria will recover. We know they will recover and they will achieve stable recovery, 5 years or more of absence-based recovery. And that's good news, because that means not only is recovery possible, but for nearly 60% of the population who meets the criteria for specialty treatment will achieve long-term recovery. It also means that 42% will not, and they will either die or from their disease and their lives will be cut short, or they will linger and continue to experience the horror of active addiction for their entire lives. So we want to try and make a dent in that, as that 42% as well. We also know that relapse reduces to 14% by year 5, and that was confirmed in a study that was done by Dennis et al. In 2007. And we know that addiction careers average 28 years with 4 to 5 episodes of treatment over an 8-year period. And the reason for stopping and reasons for staying stopped are not the same. And that comes out of a study that was done by Bess, Dr. Bess and associates back in 2008. So to summarize that, what gets me to, as a person in long-term recovery, what got me to the front door of recovery was I couldn't drink successfully and I couldn't not drink successfully. So I was stuck in a box I couldn't get myself out of. And all I wanted when I first started this path was to address that problem. As I began to develop some recovery management skills and my recovery began to manifest, my reason for staying stopped was less about the horrors of addiction and more about the value that I placed on being a person in recovery. I liked who I was. I wanted more of that. And I was willing to continue to do the things that were necessary in order to sustain that. That is my personal experience, but it's also the experience of most individuals who are in long-term recovery. The reasons for stopping, initially engaging in processes of change that bring about abstinent recovery, and the reason for staying stopped changes over time. As does, by the way, recovery capital, and we'll talk the measurement of recovery capital and the individual measures within the concept of recovery capital change over time. What enables recovery change? In 2011, Lehman, who was a specialist in the mental health care space, and so this is a study that is conducted on a population of individuals that had acute mental health conditions. He determined that an acronym of CHIME, that the mechanisms of change is connectedness, which then generates hope, then identity migration from a person who has a acute mental health condition to a person who has developed skills to manage that condition, to engaging in meaningful activities at the community level that then further empowers this cyclical process of connectedness, hope, identity, and meaning. So we know that the processes of change, regardless of the individual tools that are in the toolkit to help individuals achieve that change, that CHIME is a overall high-level view of how change takes place, both in the mental health space as well as in the substance use space. And frankly, for those of you that are in the Department of Corrections space, this is also what happens with social identity migration and assistance from offending. Individuals get connected to pro-social networks that springs hope, that changes identity, that empowers them to engage in meaningful activities such as employment and education and volunteering, in vocational training, life skills training, et cetera, and that further empowers them. And so being a person who has desisted from offending and is no longer engaged in the criminal justice system is valuable to them, and they want to maintain that. And so they continue to do the things that are necessary to maintain that. All right, let's move on to how the mechanisms of change are implemented from a provider perspective. So the first step is to measure where someone is at in their recovery, and that's what recovery capital is useful for. And then from that to plan how to build recovery capital where there's an absence of strength, as well as how to resolve barriers to recovery and unmet professional service needs, which constitute negative capital, and then how to engage the client in the execution or implementation of that plan, because it's wonderful to have a good measurement instrument. It's wonderful to have tools to build a concrete recovery plan. But if the client doesn't actually get off their butt and engage in the implementation of that plan, no change is going to take place. So measure, plan, engage are the three components of the work that Dr. Bess and his associates have been engaged in for the last 15 years. And what is it that is used to do? It's used to connect individuals to pro-social groups within the community that springs hope, that leads to meaning, mentoring, and monitoring and measuring that engagement, that leads to empowerment and then to identity migration. And then the cycle completes, it recycles through that process and gets stronger over time. So in a study of 50 drinkers in recovery for more than 5 years, a outcome was produced that recovery is a positive sum game. And so when you measure quality of life, the aim is to measure well-being in recovery compared to the general public. And people in stable recovery had elevated rates of social recovery and elevated rates of environmental recovery. And so these individuals achieved what Herbert and Bess referred to as better than well outcomes. Women spent an average of 17.7 years addicted to drugs or alcohol. Men spent 22.4 years addicted. 74% of people in long-term recovery have volunteered since beginning their recovery journey. That is twice the average general population, 2 times. The general population who does not have a substance use disorder, 38.6% are involved in volunteering, and 79.4% of individuals in long-term recovery are involved in recovery, in volunteering. And so that's a better than well outcome that not only impacts the well-being of the individual themselves, but also the community in which they reside. And one of the things that I like to point out to the NIMBY group that challenges having a recovery residence in their on their block is the only house that you can be absolutely certain no alcohol or drugs are being used is the recovery residence. And second, individuals that achieve long-term recovery are twice as likely to be engaged in providing community service. And so why wouldn't you want those people in your neighborhood? Bill White is, for those of you that are not familiar with his work, Bill White is the granddaddy, if you will, of the movement from acute model of care to a recovery-oriented model of care. He began writing about this subject matter 25 years ago and played a very significant role in building the infrastructure at the federal level to support funding of recovery community centers, peer workforce, delivery of recovery support services, the importance of recovery support services to the overall outcomes.
Broken promises. Empty threats and broken promises.
There we go. I'm happy that they're happy. And so Bill is the individual that introduced me to David Bess back in 2015. I had reached out to Bill and I asked him at that time I was chairman and president of the Florida Association of Recovery Residents. And I had spent the first 3 years in that position trying to clean up the urinalysis challenges that we were having here in this state. But once I got law enforcement engaged in that process, it was time for me to step out and get back to the business of trying to raise the bar in recovery housing. And I reached out to Bill and I said, it's wonderful that recovery housing under the NAR standard has 4 support levels. Support 1 being the pure social model, think Oxford House. Level 2 being your standard recovery housing platform that don't drink, go to meetings, pay your rent on Fridays, help the new guy coming through the front door. Level 3, a more structured delivery of concrete life skills programming by credentialed individuals, but no clinical care being provided within the platform. And then level 4 being a mix of clinical and housing And so those 4 levels were established. But what was not established was a mechanism for assessing which individual, which program, what support level was most appropriate for an individual. And so I reached out to Bill and I said, is such an assessment, does it exist? And he said, no, not to my knowledge. But there is a guy that I worked with named Dr. David Bess in the UK when we were developing the first model for measurement of recovery capital, known as the ARC, that measured personal and social capital. David has gone on to develop a more robust instrument that measures not only the personal and social capital using the ARC, but also barriers to recovery, unmet service needs, community capital, commitment to recovery, and quality of life and life satisfaction. And I think that you could use that assessment for that purpose, maybe with some revisions or enhancements, but I think that's your best starting point. So that's how my introduction to David took place. And that led to David and I working on a project to implement his instrument RECCAP, which is that expanded measurement instrument that Bill was referring to, in 8 certified recovery residences in the state of Florida. And we'll get to the outcome of that study in a moment. But the RECCAP rationale, as I learned from David, was to use as part of a recovery and treatment review process. So it's not that it can't be used in the clinical care model. It can, and in fact, in Canada, we have some in the neighborhood of 20 addiction treatment centers that are funded with federal dollars, and a total of 6,500 beds, where it is where the RECCAP is being used to measure recovery capital in a clinical setting while they're in treatment. And we have some here in the United States, and not as many. There are more coming in Canada. But another thing that we've done here in the United States is we've begun to implement this measurement of recovery capital using the RECCAP in jails, prisons, and while the residents are in the prison or in the jail, a peer worker comes in and sits down with them and measures their recovery capital using the RECCAP, and they do that at periodic intervals, so we can measure change over time. And then when that individual is released out into the community, they have an opportunity to move into a certified recovery residence, and that data that was first captured in the jail or prison automatically imports into that recovery residences platform with authorization by the client. So it becomes a continuum of care that extends from the first contact all the way through the residency. Short assessments of overall functioning, they're linked to the client outcome profile, and then provides an overall client profile and provides a well-being measure that covers sorry, I've got to get this out of my way here. The post-acute period, which is the recovery residence and beyond. And it links to recovery planning. And we're going to talk about that in some detail in a moment. But well, it's the RECCAP is not just a measure of its purpose. It's not just a measure where someone is at in recovery at this moment in time, and then with incremental implementation of the RECCAP at intervals, whether it's every 90 days or every 60 days or every 6 months, you can then measure change over time, longitudinal change. But what it also does is, and it's really its primary purpose, is to then inform recovery planning. So this person has these barriers and these unmet professional service needs that constitute negative capital. we know from the science that negative capital retards the growth of recovery strengths. So we want to resolve that negative capital as quickly as we can so that the individual will be able to stay in residency, in the recovery residence or wherever it is that they're living, without engaging in active use. And then we want to measure again and build a new plan to get from where you're at then to where you want to get 90 days from now. And we're going to repeat that process for as long as the client continues to participate. But we're also going to teach the client how to do that themselves so that when they transfer out of the recovery residence, they get to take the tool with them and they get to implement the tool themselves as they continue down the path to achieve stable recovery. Not all residents will do that, but some portion of them will, and that data then informs the further research into mechanisms of change at later stages of recovery. All right, so that's the rationale behind it. Now, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here because A, I don't think it's valuable. B, I'm not really qualified to do it. But in the FAR study, one of the things that came out of the FAR study was a validation of the rationale that I just described. And so the top section is coping, risk, physical health, psychological health, and recovery experience. Those first 4 squares represent personal capital. And then the second 5 are citizenship, housing and safety, social support, substance use and sobriety, and meaningful activities. And those constitute social capital. And then in addition to that, we're measuring the barriers and unmet service needs and negative capital, and engagement in recovery groups and recovery support services, which is community capital. And when we add all this up and add to it the time or length of stay in the recovery residence, which is the rectangular box on the right side of this, the left side of this, bottom left of this slide, what we see is that the individuals who live in the recovery residence for longer periods of time will engage in greater meaningful activities such as employment and volunteering and education, whether that's formal higher education or online courses or GE prep or life skills training. It's education on improving myself. And as a result of that, their well-being score grows, their perception of their quality of life improves, their perception of the quality of their accommodation. Literally, the house didn't change, their bedroom didn't change, but their perception of the house has changed. The perception of the bedroom has changed. And so their rating of the quality of accommodation will grow as a result of the actions that are taken on the left side of the screen. And their support network obviously will grow as they continue this process. So physical health and psychological health also improves. So they're all interrelated and they're all interdependent. And our job in the recovery resident sector is to make certain that we are holding these clients close for as long as we can and engaging them in the recovery plans that we work to build with them that are informed by the RECCAP. And the longer that we're able to hold on to them and keep them in this peer residential community, the more likely it is that these individuals will achieve resilient recovery. And it's not telling us anything that we didn't know before, but now we've got science to back it up. And I'm going to point out to you that not only do we have science to back it up, but now both SAMHSA as well as the Office of National Drug Control Policy have have come to appreciate this, and as a result, recovery housing last year was finally, after a lot of work on the part of a lot of people, SAMHSA identified recovery housing as an evidence-based practice, and those are magic words when it comes to funding. And then in this year, the Biden administration, in its policy statement through the Office of National Drug Control Policy, identified the recovery housing as a space in which recovery capital grows. And we'll talk about that in a second as well. Okay, so David Bess is working on multiple continents. He's involved in a project in the EU, European Union, called RECCAP. It's the largest study of its kind. It's $1.5 million in US dollars worth of funding for research, and it has a number of different pieces to its puzzle. The RECCAP is one. And the recovery, the Life and Recovery Survey is another. But the net of this is that the research that's being done on the subject is not limited to the United States. It's the UK, it's the EU, it's Australia, it's New Zealand, it's Canada, and the United States. So this is, you know, what is common amongst all the people that are being researched at the client are the clients, and the clients are all individuals who have identified as having an acute substance use disorder. And one of the results that came out of this study so far, it's still underway, is that using the full range of options, multiple pathways to recovery are common and are generally result in better outcomes. So using a total of 722 individuals, 311 from the UK, 230 from the Netherlands, 180 from Belgium. 12-step fellowship accounted for 62, peer-based recovery support services 38.1, residential treatment 68.7, outpatient treatment 70.4, and other services 18.1. And then if you go across the table, what you'll see is that the outcomes that are produced when this approach of a continuum of care that includes peer recovery support or peer-based support services, residential and outpatient services, and 12-step fellowship results in the best possible outcomes. Again, not this isn't ringing bells. Oh my God, we finally figured out what the path to sustained recovery is. We've known that these pieces of the puzzle were all played nicely in the sandbox together for quite some time. But again, what we know and what we're able to get funded are two different things. So what the science does is it demonstrates to the individuals who are responsible for allocating funds that pass down through, in our case, SAMHSA and SOAR dollars and the CARES Act dollars, and to some extent HUD and DOC, are predicated on our ability to demonstrate that what we do is valid and or is validated. And so this process of validation is hugely important to all of us. Another lesson that's been learned so far using 313 in a baseline and follow-up outcome study is most domains showed strong stability from baseline to 1 year follow-up, with greater stability for those at later recovery stages. 10.4% reported problematic use of the illicit or prescribed drugs at follow-up. More male participants, 14.4, reported substance use than females. while only 1.5% of people in stable recovery reported last year use. That would be individuals that are 5-year or more. And this was the case for 17.6% of people in sustained recovery and 30% in early recovery. There's better functioning for individuals whose recovery journeys include peer-based recovery support services, and they reported higher baseline levels of quality of life and social functioning, as well as lower levels of justice involvement at baseline and follow-up, and lower baseline levels of unmet service needs. So again, validation, we're on the right track, we're making progress, and federal governments are now funding this work because of this validation. A recovery study that David likes to refer to as GOYA, which is get off your ass, studied the recovery well-being and what predicts it. So more time spent with other people in recovery and more time in the last week spent in meaningful activities such as childcare, engaging in recovery groups, volunteering, education or training, and employment. So if you're looking for what is it that individuals should be doing if what they're seeking to achieve is long-term recovery, it's not just get a sponsor, get a home group and go to meetings. There's more to it than that. And that fits with our own personal experience. That's not all we did. We got a job, we worked, we continued to get educated through various different means. We volunteered, whether it was in the recovery community or it was in the broader community. If we are parents, we were involved in childcare. Some of us were involved in adult care as well. And we engaged in community groups, not only those that are recovery community groups like the 12-step community, but also pro-social community groups, PTA, volunteering at a soup kitchen, cleaning up a park, engaging in sports and recreational activities with people in the community, some of whom might be in recovery, but others who simply are not abusers of alcohol and other substances and are not using those substances while they're engaged in those sporting and recreational activities. Fitness and wellness activities, and arts and leisure activities. These are all activities at the community level that individuals who are seeking to achieve resilient recovery need to get connected to and benefit from participating in. All right, so that takes us to we're almost done with our science and the background. The role of absence and activity in promoting well-being among drug users engaged in treatment. This study was published in Journal of Substance Abuse Treatment. And it assessed changes in meaningful activities in 3 English drug action team areas over the course of a year. Drug treatment participants split into 4 categories: initiated meaningful activities, maintained meaningful activities, stopped meaningful activities, no meaningful activities. So back to the previous slide, we identified what those meaningful activities are, starting with childcare on down through involvement in volunteering, et cetera, and employment. And quality of life and well-being scores were higher and more abstinence in those who started or maintained meaningful activities. Stopping is associated with decreases in all 3 well-being measures. So again, the message from this outcome study is that engagement and maintenance of engagement in meaningful activities is hugely important for the population that we serve. Okay, that takes us to recovery capital. So let's start here with understanding the definition of recovery capital. Granville and Cloud defined recovery capital in 2008 as the breadth and depth of internal and external resources that can be drawn upon to initiate and sustain recovery from acute alcohol and other drug problems. Let's unpack that. The breadth and depth, that implies measurement. You've got to be able to measure the breadth and the depth of recovery capital, internal strengths that I, as an individual, bring to the table in this mission to achieve resilient recovery. And then so that's the internal strengths. Then there are external resources, and that's all this community activity, employment opportunities, education opportunities, volunteering opportunities, engagement with community groups and sports and recreation, arts and fitness and wellness, arts and leisure. Those external resources that exist in the community are what we are going to connect the individual to, so that they are drawing upon both their internal and external resources to initiate, to begin the process, and then sustain the process of recovery from a substance use disorder. White and Cloud, a little later that year, published a study that suggested stable recovery, again, 5 years or longer, is best predicted on the basis of recovery assets or strengths rather than pathologies. So what have we been measuring up until this time when recovery capital was first the measurement of recovery capital was first introduced? We were measuring what's wrong with you. We have multiple instruments that are long and complex, and we thoroughly examine everything that is wrong with you and your life. And when you come out of that as a client, but also as a clinical caregiver, when you come out of one of those sessions where you're doing this, you don't feel good. You feel horrible. You've just spent 45 minutes to an hour going through all the things that are wrong with me in my life and nothing about what's right. So it's not there's no encouragement that comes from that process. But further, we don't build on our liabilities, we build on our strengths. And so what we want to do is we want to measure what strengths do you have, and where is there an area for growth in those domains or subdomains of recovery strengths? And then what are we going to do to help you build strength where there's an absence of strength? And then the second thing we're going to do is we're going to measure what barriers and or unmet professional service needs are deterring you from being able to build and sustain strengths in those strength categories. And how are we going to resolve those as quickly as possible? Because what our science tells us, working with the recovery resident sector in particular, individuals that have high negative capital aren't going to make it to 90 days. They're going to prematurely discharge from your program. 76% of them will prematurely discharge from your program due to either reoccurrence of use, abandonment, they just didn't come home on a Wednesday, or they're discharged involuntarily for some reason other than recurrence of use, like stealing food from their housemates, or getting into fights, or some activity that is cause for dismissal. And we have that data is coming out of over 10,000 RECCAP evaluations that have been completed in recovery residences since we began this project. It's reliable. We know it's the case. I often hear recovery housing owner operators that first come on board tell me that they've got a 92% success ratio. And I understand how important it is as a recovery residence operator to be able to maintain that your program is producing positive outcomes for the people that you serve. But nobody has a 92% success ratio. Nobody, nowhere in the world does anybody have that for this population. So it's not possible. And in fact, what we're seeking to achieve is that 86%, because at 86%, we're consistent with other chronic conditions, and there will be relapse, just as there is with the diabetics and with those that have hypertension. Anytime the individual is responsible for management of a chronic health condition, there's going to be a degree of relapse. And so if we get to 86% over a 5-year period, we've successfully achieved our objective. But right now, if we do not resolve negative capital within that first 45 days, the likelihood of that individual still being on board and engaged in your program 45 days later is very low. So premature discharge within the first 90 days is currently running at around 76%. And obviously we want to make a positive impact on that. Okay. So I said we get back to this, and I just want to make certain, I'm hopeful that all of you are familiar with this, but if you're not, this is the Executive Office of the President, Office of National Drug Control Policy for 2022. And in it, this is a copy directly from it. Sorry, let me get back. As we expand the continuum of care to address the chronic nature of substance use disorders, recovery support services help people build recovery capital to manage and sustain long-term recovery. Offered in a variety of institutional and community-based settings, recovery support services include peer support services and engagement, recovery housing, recovery community centers, and recovery programs in high schools and colleges. Scaling up the capacity and infrastructure of these programs will create strong resource networks to equip communities to support recovery for everyone. This is a policy statement. This means that the White House has made the decision that they are going to fund this delivery of recovery support services within this sector. And that means recovery housing, recovery community centers, and recovery programs in high schools and colleges. And what is the purpose? It is to build recovery capital so that we can manage and sustain long-term recovery outcomes. So this is a huge win for all of us and for the people that we serve. Everybody benefits from this process. So let's talk about the ice cream cone model of recovery. Recovery is an intrinsically social process, and one that needs not only personal commitment and determination, but also the support and engagement of the social network and support system. So it's important that at the community level, that the community is supportive of engaging in processes and programs that promote recovery for those individuals who have a substance use disorder. Without the community's engagement, it's very difficult to create an environment in which long-term recovery is achievable. It can be for some, but we're not going to shorten addiction careers, and we're not going to extend recovery careers, which is our mission, without getting the community involved. So it starts with this concept of asset-based community development, or ABC, and mapping what assets exist in the community, what assets are not currently existing in the community that need to be developed at the community level, so that we can help individuals engage in those community-based resources to promote social identity migration. So there's a lot of science around SIM and mapping of social identity migration and the connection of individuals to those resources. But I'm not going to go into all of that today. I'm just going to give you a quick synopsis of social identity migration that hopefully will be useful to you. So I arrive at the front door of recovery, and I identify as an addict and or alcoholic. And my sense of self is I have low self-esteem, I have low self-worth, I have low self-efficacy, and everything is about me, and what's in it for me. And then often, as a person first arriving at the front door of recovery, I feel very much like everybody that I love I've hurt everybody that I love and hurt them the most, and that everybody would have been better off if I wasn't born. So my feeling, my sense of identity is very low. And the people I've been hanging out with are people that feel the same way. And they're people that are engaged in practices that are antisocial. They may be stealing, they may be breaking and entering and stealing, they may be doing strong arm robberies, they may be unemployed and not seeking employment. The population I'm hanging out with are not people that are living fruitful, rewarding lives. And what I'm getting connected to is a population of people who have the same underlying condition that I have, substance use disorder, but whose lives are meaningful and purposeful, and who are experiencing the joys of living sober and being members of the community and participating in community activities with people that are both in recovery and not in recovery because they don't need to be. And so I migrate from identifying as this broken human being with no hope to a person in recovery with hope and promise that if I continue to do the things that I'm doing right now, I can achieve the same rewarding, purposeful, meaningful, joyful lives that this new group of people I'm hanging out with are experiencing. So I am migrating, my social identity is migrating from that of the active use group to the pro-social non-use group. And that's a huge piece of this social model of recovery that we as individuals in the recovery housing space have long known for 50 plus years. But now the science has caught up with us. And as a result of the science catching up with us, not only has funding begun to flow to support the activities that we've been engaging in all along, but also to fund the delivery of concrete, structured recovery support services that include measurement of recovery capital, then the building of concrete recovery plans for a leg of this individual's recovery journey. And by leg, I mean 45 days is the first leg, 45 days is 90 days is the second leg. Then every leg thereafter is 90-day increments, so 180 days, 270, 360, et cetera. And it's broken down that way for reasons that we'll talk about in a few moments. But the key here is that what we're doing is we're helping this individual to build their personal or individual recovery capital, their social recovery capital, and their community recovery capital. And as a result of that, they are achieving the recovery management skills to manage this chronic condition and continue to down this path towards stable recovery. And all told, the impact of this is not only on the individual and their family, but also on the well-being of the community. So it is it's a positive sum game for all parties. Which brings us to the measurement. So the RECCAP instrument is takes about 30 minutes to complete as a baseline evaluation and 15 minutes to complete in follow-up evaluations. It's the same scale or same set of scales. The difference is there are parent and child questions, and everybody that comes through our front door is likely to answer a parent question in the substance use barrier, yes, which then opens up a whole series of questions about the substances used during the last 90 days and how many days of use for each of them. And then in the criminal justice involvement section, and answer yes to questions around offending or involvement with the police. Will open up another section, and the same thing is true in a couple of other sections of the actual assessment instrument. So 30 minutes to complete the baseline on average, and 15 minutes for the client to complete a follow-up evaluation themselves thereafter. And what is it? The scales that are included in the RECCAP are quality of life and life satisfaction. These are all validated scales. This is an evidence-based instrument. So it's a quality of life and life satisfaction, which is a abbreviated version of the World Health Organization's scale. Barriers to recovery. There are 5 subdomains: accommodation, substance use, risk-taking, and as a barrier, risk-taking is about injection, intravenous drug use, and identifying an at-risk population for HIV, Hep C, et cetera. And involvement in the criminal justice system, which includes recent offending as well as involvement in parole, probation, or drug court programs. However, if I have not offended in the last 90 days and I'm on parole, or I'm on probation, or I'm currently engaged in a drug court program, that is in and of itself not a barrier. It is cautionary, but it won't score as a barrier. It's cautionary because if I don't comply with my parole, if I don't comply with probation, if I don't comply with the case management platform in the drug court system, then that puts me at risk. But as long as I comply, I'm good. And then we measure service involvement and needs, and there are 3 buckets here: involved and satisfied, involved and unsatisfied, and not involved. If I answer one question in each of these 8 subdomains, which are alcohol treatment, substance drug treatment, primary healthcare, mental health care, housing support, employment support, family relations or counseling, and then other specialists, which might be a dentist or a chiropractor, what have you. If I answer yes, I need help, or I need additional help, it will color code it red, and it will score it as a barrier, and it will add minus 0.625 to the measure of recovery capital. Every one of those barriers above, if it scores as a barrier, it's minus 10. So we have 5 barriers, that's minus 50. And we have 2 unmet service needs at 6.25 each is minus 1350. And if you look at the top, it's 6250. So negative recovery capital score is minus 62.5. And then positive recovery capital is the quality of life and life satisfaction. The personal capital, which is the first 5 vertical bars under recovery strengths. The second 5 are the social capital, and that, by the way, is known as the ARC. And then community capital and commitment to recovery make up the 5 recovery strength domains. So when we come over and now translate that into a measurement that we can use for the purposes of recovery planning, we see this scale, same data that was collected, but now calculated and presented differently so that we can begin this process of planning with our resident or client. So negative capital, as we talked about, is a deterrent. It deters or retards the growth of recovery strengths. So negative capital is below the 0 line, and the 5 recovery strength categories are above the 0 line. The 5 strength categories each have a scale of 0 to 20 maximum, and the negative capital scales have a measurement of 0 to 50 each. And so the overall scale runs from minus 100 to plus 100. The maximum score I could possibly achieve is 100, and the worst score that I could possibly achieve is minus 100. And somewhere in between is where I'm going to likely find myself. Okay. I know there'll be questions about that. This is the positive capital group, which also is referred to as recovery strengths. So that brings us to, we've implemented that baseline evaluation. We've measured where the client's at. We just saw what those measures look like. And now what we're going to do is we're going to build a plan to help this individual get to where we'd like to see them and where they'd like to be by the time the plan ends. And so in most recovery residences and all recovery residents that are operating under the WACAR, the Washington Association of Quality Recovery Residences network, operate on a periodicity, a RECCAP measurement periodicity of baseline, which is within 72 hours of their enrollment in that recovery residence. And then the next evaluation will be done at 45 days from that date. And then the following evaluation will be done 45 days later. So we're doing a baseline evaluation and building a recovery plan for the next 45 days. We're going to do a follow-up evaluation of 45 days and build a new recovery plan for the next 45 days. And then we're going to do a new follow-up evaluation and build a new recovery plan for the next 90 days. And at that point, if the client is still with us, we're going to build a plan for the next 90 days based on that evaluation. And in between the plans, we're going to provide navigational support, which delivers a structured recovery support service wherein a navigator mentors, monitors, and measures the client's engagement in their recovery plan. Because again, we previously identified that it's wonderful to have a great measurement instrument that tells you where they're at. And it's wonderful to have a set of recovery planning tools that are informed by those measures. But if the client doesn't engage in the recovery plan, then no change is going to take place. And so recovery capital is not going to grow accordingly. So we want to, and we also know from our experience in this sector that it is incredibly easy for an individual who arrives at our front door 100% committed to doing whatever it takes to achieve recovery, and they're sincere and they're seeking our guidance and our help. And 2 weeks later, they've got a job, their kids are talking to them, their ex-wife is not, moaning and groaning about child support, and they got a few friends, and everything compared to where they were when they came through our front door, life is great. And therefore, I don't need to do all the stuff that I agreed to do when I first started here. Our job is to make certain that we stick with them and hold them accountable to what they agreed to do. So part of this recovery planning process is no goal, no concrete goal gets added to the recovery plan that the client doesn't 100% commit to. Because if the client doesn't commit to it, what's the purpose of putting it in the plan? We can spend some time with the client trying to help them appreciate why this path is most likely to produce the outcome they're seeking, but ultimately it's their decision, and we have to honor that, because if we don't, we're just creating an environment where it's adversarial as opposed to one that is supportive. And I'm sure there'll be some questions about that when we get towards the Q&A. So Bess and Ledet did a study, Alexander Ledet in 2010, that then began to incorporate, because now RECCAP measured not only personal and social recovery capital, but also community capital, what the impact of that was on individuals in stable recovery 5 years or longer. And what we learned from that study was that my needs change over time, because my recovery has stabilized, and as a result of that, what I value has changed, and my perception or appreciation for what improvements I might make to myself also changes. And so the focus points change over time. So back to the recovery planning, the purpose of the pivot is when we're now pivoting from the measure to the planning. And we need to, when we present to the client these measures of recovery capital here in the scale, and then here, we're bridging our way towards this map, because we now want to build a recovery plan. So we metaphorically present the recovery strength domains or positive capital domains as fruit-bearing trees, and the barriers to recovery and unmet service needs that retard the growth of those strengths as pollutants or contaminants of the soil in which those trees grow, so that we have the ability to have a conversation with the client about, here's what your fruit trees look like. Your commitment over here, the fourth tree, is all strong. It's healthy. The fruits are green, they're healthy. But in personal capital, 2 of your strength categories are acutely unhealthy. There's an absence of strength in both coping and life functioning and recovery experience. There's moderate strength in physical and health. There's healthy strengths in psychological health, and there's moderate health in risk-taking at the personal capital level. And then The same, could be said for social capital: 3 moderately healthy or 4 moderately healthy and 1 acute absence of strength. In community capital, connectivity and participation and connectivity and socialization and daily activities are either moderately or moderate health or healthy. But service to recovery groups is an acute absence of strength. And then in quality of life and life satisfaction, generally it's a result of the other activities. So we're not going to actually take a lot of action over there. Even support network, which is the one that's red, will grow organically as a result of engagement in community capital. But we know that we don't want to focus on those fruits right yet, because these barriers are substance use, risk-taking, criminal justice, work training, volunteering, mental health care, housing and support, and recovery support. That's the focus for this first 45 days, to resolve those barriers and unmet service needs, because if we don't, and we focus on the strength side of the equation, we're going to lose them. They're not going to be with us 45 days from now, or definitely not going to be with us 90 days from now. So we want to get those barriers to recovery and unmet service needs resolved as quickly as possible. And so we're going to build a plan to do that. And we might incorporate 1 or 2 strengths into that first plan as some of these other goals get achieved over that 45-day period. So what our system does, and we built this from scratch because it didn't exist, would have been much more, it would have been wonderful to be able to go find a software application that we could subscribe to and modify for our purposes. But this thing had to be built from scratch, and over $2 million has been invested in it so far. Anyway, what it does is it says, when a client answers a question or affirmation in the RECCAP evaluation, that answer may trigger a goal template to be served up in the plan goals section, so that the navigator who is working with the client to build a recovery plan can have a conversation about barriers and unmet service needs and getting those resolved. And then they can choose to add a goal to that plan. And then they can go modify and tailor that goal to the individual client. ROI is not prescriptive in these goal templates. In fact, the first step in working with a WACAR provider of recovery residents under the WACAR platform is to work with them to modify those goal templates to reflect that provider's programming, as opposed to the standard boilerplate template that is imported when the system is first set up, and to tag community-based resources where appropriate to each of the action items, or to each of the appropriate action items that make up that goal. So we're going to talk a little more about that in a second. But what's important is to remember where we started from. Where we started in this presentation about building recovery capital and understanding it is this. The definition is the depth and breadth of internal and external resources that can be drawn upon to initiate and sustain recovery from acute alcohol and other drug problems. So the external resources we identified are community-based resources. So as a recovery resident, I need to know where my existing clients and alumni engage in sports and recreational activities. And I need to embed that in my resource directory and tag that to the sports and recreation goal. And I need to do the same thing for fitness and wellness, and the same thing for arts and leisure. I need to do the same thing for recovery group engagement and for volunteering and for employment opportunities and for housing support, et cetera. And in the mental health care space, the primary health, typically a recovery residence has individuals that arrive and who have no health insurance and haven't, had an opportunity to connect with a physician for healthcare, or connect with a psychiatrist or a psychologist for mental health care. And so we need to know who we're going to make the referral to, because that's not what we do. Our job is to make the connection and to assertively link the client to that resource at the community level. So we need to embed those in our resource directory. We need to tag them to action items with the goal. And then we need to meet with the client periodically to review their progress and confirm that those connections have in fact taken root. And all of this is part and parcel of resolving barriers to recovery and unmet service needs. And then there's another section that deals with growing recovery strengths. I didn't put that in this presentation, but it exists in the platform. And once those goals have been added and modified, then it becomes a recovery plan. And this is what that looks like in the system, with the measurement of progress with each of the goals, and then the events where we've signed clients, or the clients have voluntarily opted in to participate in certain events in the community. And now we're measuring their engagement in community activities, as well as their completion of goals designed to, in this case, reduce their or eliminate the barriers to recovery and unmet service needs. And the next time we get to build a plan, we're going to focus on building recovery strengths in areas where there's an absence of strength. And we have all of our internal resources measured by the RECCAP over on the left side: personal capital, 3 out of 5, social capital, 4 out of 5, community capital, 1 out of 5, commitment to recovery, all 5, and quality of life and life satisfaction doesn't really count when it comes to resources that you can draw upon, because those are outcomes, not direct resources. And then the external resources are also categorized under the same domains: barrier to recovery, service needs, and then personal capital. And if you scroll down, it would show you social capital and community capital as well. Okay, so we talked in the beginning about social identity migration, and I just want to show you this slide real quick. I'm connected to a using group, and I've got very low engagement with non-using groups, and that's my active use period. Then my early recovery, I still have contacts and individuals that are in the using group that I have contact with, but I'm beginning to build some support from individuals that are in the non-using and the recovery group sector. And then in stable recovery, while I do have some people that I interact with that are still using, the vast majority of people that I interact with are not using or abusing drugs or alcohol, or are engaged in recovery themselves. And so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to help individuals to go through this process of social identity change. And so the connection to recovery community resources and the building of a resource directory that we can then use for recovery planning purposes and connecting is the recovery community, the service providers that we're going to link clients to for primary health, mental health, addiction treatment, especially treatment, et cetera, employment, education, training, and events and activities at the community level. And what that does is it creates pathways to pro-social groups, meets individual life needs and aspirations, builds hope and strengths and personalized interests and activities that are compatible with their skills and their needs. And all of that goes to this CHIME model of connectedness, hope, identity, meaning, and empowerment we began with. Community connectors, as the recovery residents and operators that are part of this group attending today know, but I'm sure this is also true in the addiction treatment and in the corrections or criminal justice space. Individuals who have lived experience with the resources. Now, I'm not talking about lived experience in recovery necessarily, although many of them do. But what individuals in our community are familiar with the community-based resources that we are entering into our resource directory that can act as community connectors, that literally can pick someone up and take them to a meeting and introduce them to their friends and at that meeting and begin to develop a support network. What individuals are familiar with that play on a softball team, and where some people in recovery attend and participate in some non-using groups. People in the non-using group also participate. And so how do we identify individuals in our community that can act as community connectors? And the answer to that is by going through a process of interviewing our alumni and saying, you know, who are you alumni are certainly candidates as community connectors, but also individuals that help you get connected. Who are they? Because clearly they were willing to do it for you, so perhaps they're willing to do that. And we build a network of community connectors so that we can help this process of assertive linkage to these resources at the community level. And then what are those? They are mutual aid groups, they're volunteering, education, employment, recreation and sports, peer recovery community groups, and community connectors are assertively linking clients to those groups. And in a study that's part of that RECCAP past project in the EU, 21 connectors in approximately 3 months were recruited. 34 community assets were identified. And this was used to link people new to recovery to meaningful assets at the community level. And the purpose was to build personal capital, social and community capital, and to act as scaffolding for them during their period of early recovery, which involves effective linkage to community groups and using community connectors and a sort of linkage and ongoing support produces higher levels of abstinence and social identity migration. To sum up on that, Manning in 2012 did a study where in an acute assessment unit at Mausley Hospital, the problem was low client median attendant rates while on the ward. So the trial condition for the study was we're going to hand them a pamphlet, we're going to have the doctor make a referral, or we're going to actually have someone in the community who is in recovery themselves come and pick their butt up and take them to a meeting and introduce them to their friends. And what do you think the outcome of that study was? For all those people that received a pamphlet, none of them, 0 attended mutual aid meetings. 0% of those that were referred by a doctor attended meetings on the outside. And 86% of those who were picked up and introduced by a peer continue to engage in meeting attendance, AANA, Cocaine Anonymous, and there was a significant reduction in substance use after 3 months of their departure from the hospital. So we know that this process of assertive linkage by members of the recovery community to community-based recovery support groups like mutual aid is the only path that produces long-term sustained engagement by the clients. So where do we go from here? Necessary levels of research and analysis. The first is the process of individual change, because it's not the same thing for everybody. So a African-American female aged 26 to 39 from a area like Detroit is going to have a set of needs that are different from an African-American woman aged 26 to 39 that's from Seattle. And so we need to begin to look at this and I know that the word profiling, particularly when we begin talking about African Americans, is a real challenge. But this is not negative profiling. This is positive profiling. It's like identifying what does this group need, and this group being defined as a subsector of the larger group so that we can engage them and provide them with the resources that they need to bring about change. And then research into social groups and this whole process of social identity change is ongoing, and active engagement in recovery community resources in general, not just recovery community resources, is ongoing, and an investment in research in this needs to continue. And then changes that are produced in the communities and the community well-being as a result of this work is a research focus that has been really poorly served up to this point, but it's absolutely necessary in order to bring about this engagement of the community in this process. If we can show the communities themselves at the individual community level how they will benefit, they're more likely to participate with us in this process. And then for recovery capital, we need to demonstrate reliable change, understand and build the mechanisms of change, which has to do with the recovery planning and engagement in the plan, develop clear criteria for validating outcomes, and focus on the needs of particular populations and recovery settings. And so all that is underway. That's what ROI is doing, and we're doing that in combination with the Virginia Association of Recovery Residences, the Florida Association of Recovery Residents, the West Virginia Association of Recovery Residents, the Michigan Association of Recovery Residences, and the Washington Association of Quality Recovery Residences. And soon we'll expand to Tennessee and Connecticut and Massachusetts and Maine, et cetera. So the more we have, the more data we have, the better we are able to understand and build mechanisms of change and develop that criteria for validation of outcomes, and appreciate the need to focus on particular populations and settings. And everybody will benefit from that, and that's our mission. All right, so we have now gotten to the end of the recovery capital measures and understanding, and I'm open for questions. So I guess, Bree, you're gonna perhaps funnel those questions to me, and I'll do my best to answer them.
If Bree, you're muted.
Oh, my video is on, but I was muted. Sorry about that. Yeah, so there's one from Patrick asking if there'll be some training available for clients / residents. He said that it would be a useful resource to have for new users.
Yeah, it's a great question, and the answer is yes. ROI recently invested in a learning management system in LMS, and we're in the process of building content for delivery in that LMS that comes along for the ride with the subscription by the network, in this case, the Washington Association of Recovery Residences. And so that training becomes available to all the groups or all the stakeholders within the platform, including clients. So there will be different learning paths, and clients will have a learning path, and navigators have a learning path, and directors and program directors, et cetera, and peer leaders have the different learning paths. But all that is under development now, and we expect to release it. The first of it will release late February, but the bulk of it will release in April of 2022. That process won't stop then, it'll continue on. But yes, training on all of this will be available and appropriate for clients' consumption. We're big on that.
As far as the chat goes, I don't see any other questions, but just how. Oh, you have one? Go ahead.
Sorry. Hey, John, this is Travis Gannon. A quick question for you. We're working on a strategy internally with our organization for recovery housing on this, and we want to use our peer leaders to do intake and possibly some navigation stuff as well. Do you see conflicts having a peer leader within the house managing the other side of it with the you know, I guess the best way to put it would be, obviously we'll do the intake and assessment piece, but the navigation piece, is that something that we should look to have outside, or would we be able to have our peer leaders within the home do the navigation piece as well?
Travis, I'd love to be able to answer your question positively, but the answer is that we have experienced that our experience is that peer leaders, there are just so many challenges around that. The first challenge is peer leaders come and go, and so the training is complex, and it's pretty involved in the whole recovery planning process, and so that creates an obstacle in and of itself. But a fundamental obstacle is that a peer leader is a house member. I am not going to be open, honest, and transparent with someone whom I live with. The individual. Here's the ideal. The ideal is that the individual that's a navigator and is engaged in both baseline evaluations as well as the building of recovery plans, and then meeting periodically with the client to mentor, monitor, and measure their engagement in the plan. Be a certified peer specialist. That's where you want to get to. Now, I get that the problem around that is funding, so we can't start there. But you probably want to have a recovery coach, and you want to deliver recovery navigational support, both the recovery planning and the periodic, through that recovery coach to individuals that are engaged in the program. And then that leads to a discussion about, well, who are we going to do this with? And it is also our experience that when we first started with Virginia, what they did is they brought all their residents into the system, and they tried to deliver navigational support to everybody, regardless of whether they were there for one day or they were there for 7 months. And it was too big a lift, and it caused a lot of confusion. So what we recommend to Wakar and to Mar as a result of that experience is, while you can certainly offer to an existing resident the opportunity to opt in to RECCAP and, sorry, not RECCAP, everybody's got to do RECCAP, but because we need the long-term measurement of change over time, and you need that as well. But when it comes to recovery planning and the navigational support sessions, only for existing clients, only those that opt in would be provided that service. And then all new residents coming through the front door, you just start them from day one on that process. But
Okay.
the answer to your question is using peer leaders to do this work is going to cause you headaches and a lot of angst down the road.
No, I think that having that differentiation will be important. What are your thoughts on at least, I want to have the peer leaders involved in some facet of this with the client's approval. Are there best practices regarding, what the peer leaders should be doing within the homes versus navigators, obviously those things, but I want to involve our peer leaders within the homes. I think it's an important piece. I think a lot of this will kind of move us away from a lot of Excel sheets and weekly meeting recaps and some of this paperwork that our peer leaders will doing. This platform will be able to give them that information regarding those things. So maybe you could just talk about, if peer leaders have a role and it's doing well somewhere, what are they doing versus the navigation piece? Like a little more clarity for me would be great on that.
Yeah, and you and I can have an offline conversation about this, but just for the group, the answer is this. So this is the short answer, and then we can expand on it when we meet one-on-one. Peer leaders often in many recovery residences are responsible for curfews and for chore assignments and for meeting attendance and for general behavior while living in the house, etc. And all of those things are manageable within the platform and can be set up on a permission basis for the peer leader to have access to that and to have limited access to some other components if the provider chooses to do so, such as here's the summary page with the current recovery measures and the longitudinal change charts around recovery capital. So we can turn that on or off for a peer leader. So all of the platform has been designed so that we can get very granular in what we permission and what we don't permission. In some cases, a recovery residence that's using the financial management module to do automatic accounting, the billing and the collection of payment, et cetera, and recording of such. Also put that task on the peer leader to collect the rents and to report, clients that have not paid or they have only made partial payments. All of that can also be permissioned within the platform if that application is, if that component is activated for that recovery residence. It comes along for the ride, so there's no additional charge for it, but there are recovery residences that don't want to use it, and we don't make them use it. So there's a lot that we can do to engage them, but the thing that strikes me as the most valuable resource that peer leaders bring to the table is that they are generally people that are in longer term recovery. They're in early recovery, but they've been in recovery longer than the new guy that's coming through the front door. And therefore they have already made connections at the community level. So they themselves are the best of all of the community connectors, is a peer leader in the house who helps assertively link that client to resources at the community level. That's a big piece. So we can talk more about how that's done and how it's recorded in the system. But that would be, that is the best use of peer leaders.
Really helpful, John. Thank you.
Thank you.
John, I believe Joe had a question. Joe, did you want to ask a question?
Yes, please, and thank you. It's been very informative session. It's my
Great.
first one. Yes, very much so. And I want to stay on the topic. I think it's walking through recovery with your residents. Yes, something like so.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So in that, in getting certified, how interactive is the organization that you are in? And is there like software, like what comes to mind is like the questionnaire, for instance, that pretty much assesses what level of care the person needs? Is there a software or something, or is it like pen and paper, or do you have?
The recovery capital assessment is built into the ARMS, the Advanced Recovery Management System, and the WACAR, the Washington Association of Quality Recovery Residences, has received state funding for that annual subscription at the network enterprise level that then allows them to roll that out to individual members of WACAR houses, recovery housing members, for free. They don't have to pay for it, and they don't have to pay for education around it on how to use it. They don't have to pay for anything. All they've got to do is implement the platform to help clients build recovery capital. So all of this measurement is all done within that platform with a online evaluation or assessment. And the navigator sits down with the client and they complete that evaluation together in the baseline evaluation, and that takes about 30 minutes. And then follow-up evaluations, the client is issued a client portal that allows them to get into the system themselves from any web-enabled device, including their smartphone. And it's not an app you download. It is a web-based platform that dynamically adjusts to the size of the screen of the viewer. But they log in, and the client then can complete a follow-up evaluation at 45 days, at 90 days, at 180 days, in about 15 minutes. And it is our recommendation to a recovery residence that they amend their house rules and consequences document that is provided to clients at the time of intake to include a rule that says you need to complete your RECCAP evaluations within 72 hours of their due date, or you're going to go on early curfew. And as soon as you get them done, you come off early curfew. And if they do that, clients will quickly come to appreciate, I need to do this, and they'll do it. And now we can build a recovery plan each time they do that with the navigator. So all of this is built into a platform, and that platform is free to the users and free to the clients. And last point to bring up here, Joe, is that the client, when they are discharged from the recovery residence as having completed the program, they get to take that login credential to their client portal with them. And during that process of being in the recovery residence, the navigator has transferred the responsibility for recovery planning to the client. So now the client can use the entire platform themselves without the navigator. But if they get into a situation where they need some guidance or support, they can reach back to the navigator and say, hey, I need 15 minutes of your time. They get on a Zoom, or they go have a cup of coffee and they talk about whatever it is, and they resolve whatever issue the client has. And so this process of engagement of navigators and clients post-service delivery continues indefinitely for as long as the client is engaged in the process. And the value of that to the recovery residents, to WACAR, the enterprise network, and to the state of Washington, who's funding it all, is now we're collecting data pertaining to longer term recovery beyond the discharge of that client from the recovery residence. And so that data further validates the process of achieving this longer term recovery, shortening of addiction careers, expanding of recovery careers.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. That's it. Now I have lots of questions. It's my first session and I have lots of questions, but I think I could find answers in emails and even exploring different websites and then attending more seminars. So thanks again.
Thank you, Joe. And let me ask you one question. Joe, do you have a recovery house?
I had one that turned into 3 some years ago in South Carolina, where I'm at now, quite honestly. I logged on at 10 this morning and a 3-hour difference, you know.
Yep.
But when I initially planned this, I was in Washington. So I did have them, but I want to re-enter the recovery community with a higher bar. And
Yeah.
so I'm uncertain whether or not what I have in mind, you know, I see the relationship, I think, with having your organization sort of manage, it seems like, manage the recovery through that portal and all that for the statistics and such. It's kind of the idea that I get. I could be wrong, but yeah, I've had recovery houses that wasn't very interactive or very, my idea was you're responsible for your own recovery, you know.
Yep.
But this time, I need to get more involved for my own personal self-interest, and also too, I have a friend who, whenever we showed her recovery houses for her son, they weren't good enough for her, and so I think that there's a niche market that's not being that's overwhelmingly being overlooked. And so I intend to you know, to please that market. And so it's going to be like very expensive, and it's going to be very, very much worth it. And so I like all the information I hear.
Got it. And Joe, I'm happy to meet with you and take you for a tour of the actual system, so that you have a better appreciation of how it actually operates. And we have, while the SCAR, the South Carolina Association of Recovery Residences, is not yet a enterprise provider, we do have individual independent providers in South Carolina that are currently using the program, and we're in discussions with both SCAR and NACAR, I guess it is, the North Carolina Association of Recovery Residences. So I think that probably we'll end up with a hybrid, which is the Carolina Association of Recovery Residences version of this, and it'll cover both states. But
that's good to know. That's good to know, but I'm not there yet. In fact, I'm only here to help my mom heal from falling. She broke her hip and she's very much disabled. So I'm only here for another 7 days. What I plan on doing is starting the whole thing in Washington, and my vision is to expand through the lower 48.
Got it.
Excellent. I know for sure it's going to happen.
Well, and Jason, of course, is in charge of WACAR, and I'm glad to meet you, and I look forward to working with you and helping you to achieve your goals.
And
Joe, I could learn a lot from you guys.
Joe, I'm the executive director for WACAR here in Washington State, and also on here today with us is Brianna. She works with the accreditation. Joe, I'm gonna put down here in the chat box both of our email contacts. I'll put my phone number down there for you as well. Joe, when you get back here to Washington State, if you have questions, thoughts, suggestions, need help walking through this accreditation process and getting your houses done, you don't hesitate to reach out at any time, and we're here for you, man.
Thanks. Like my biggest hurdle so far, and what's been the most like a mammoth task, is just to build a board of directors.
I get it. Yep.
Yeah. So it's just tough, and that's just been the holdup, quite honestly. So anyway, because I want it to be like Joe proof, you know, and so that means having a set of responsible board members.
Mhm.
And I can't even get people to interact on a website about it. You know, they'll talk about it, and I don't want just people building a resume. I really want people involved. So it's just been a big deal. I can't seem to do it. But then I haven't been going to in-person meetings. Maybe I could try there. So we'll see. I'll definitely be in touch with if you give me that information, though. I've been talking to a business mentor too, but he's not in recovery, but he's been giving me some ideas. Not in recovery matters though.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Just reach out. Jason's going to put my info in the chat, and that goes for anybody on here as well. If you're not accredited through Walker and you're interested in starting the process or want to schedule a Zoom or have me answer any questions about the accreditation process, feel free to grab that email and reach out to me. And Jason placed in the chat earlier as well for the providers on here that are accredited through Walker and would like more information for the implementing the RECCAP in your residences. Randy is our recovery navigator, and her email's in the chat as well. It's randy@walker.org. So she can, we can help kind of bridge that gap for you to start implementing it and providing more training around it. So is there any more questions from anybody for John while he's here?
Great. Anything further?
Nope. If there's no more questions, then we just want to thank you all for joining Walker and John with ROI. And yeah, we will keep a lookout on your email for upcoming trainings. We have some coming up in February as well. And feel free to, oh, do you want to say something, John?
I just wanted to thank Jason for inviting me to present today, and you for all your support, as well as Randy. And thank you all for participating in your questions. And I look forward to working with you as we all move forward on this mission to improve outcomes for the people that we serve, and also demonstrate the value of recovery housing to the federal government. And hopefully we'll see in Washington that which we've seen already transpire in Virginia, where the Virginia Association of Recovery Residents, as a result of using the platform and implementing the recovery capital measure and recovery planning that we've talked about today, satisfied the state that this was a worthy enterprise. And they achieved a grant of $10 million in funding for the next 3 years that flows down through the Virginia Association of Recovery Residences to their members for funding indigent bed fees and for delivery of concrete recovery support services. And so the promise is that if we build it, they will come. And so we got to build it. We got to show them we can do it. And then when we have done that, they immediately identified this as a valuable resource that requires their funding, and they commit significant dollars to it. So that's what we're hoping to achieve in Washington and other states as we progress from this point forward. I again thank you all. Hope you all have a wonderful week, and look forward to speaking with you soon.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.